Come on, you're not serious. What? I am. It's clearly the fastest way to get to our campsite. But, have you heard of the stories? The depths? The thing that lives there? Just stories. I have a friend who uses it every single week for his deliveries, and I talked to him yesterday. But I switched off the walkie-talkie. There they go again. I sighed to Gaffy, who was next to me. You can't blame him, trust me. Brian's just thick-headed, and even anyone says, he dismisses. Only thing he trusts are his own thoughts. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. I find it irritating, Gabby replied, gripping the wheel harder and glaring at the vehicle in front of her. Do you need me to switch it back on? I asked. No. I think that hearing plain silence is a million times better than hearing their incessant arguing. But don't you think? Relax, we'll switch it on later. We don't want the lead car to bring us to some deserted area rather than the campsite we're supposed to go to, right? Gabby turned her head to glance at me and said, Right, I replied. I leaned back on the leather seat of the car and looked behind at the back seat. As usual, our camping bags, with all of our supplies, still sat on the back seat. Stop doing that. You're making me think someone's sitting behind us, Gabby complained. Sorry, lady, I muttered and turned my head to look in front again. Just a few more hours, and we will reach the campsite where we will camp for the next few days. Brian said he would catch a deer. He will probably come back with some nuts and berries again, and Gabby will rage at him, and he won't listen to her again. Ah well, might as well catch some sleep, I thought, as my eyelids drooped down, and I nodded off to complete silence. Wake up, sleepyhead, Gabby's voice pierced through my dream, and I sat up, still half asleep, realizing that we had stopped. Through heavy eyelids, I could see Gabby, along with Brian and Becky, standing in front of some sign on the road. Groaning, I opened the car door and stepped out of the car. What's going on? I muttered sleepily. Brian rolled his eyes and remarked, Did you forget? Before you enter the Whistler's Highway, you must sign the agreement. Stepping forward to scrutinize the sign, I remembered. Oh, right. I said, hastily. I took out my marker and signed on the surface of the sign. Danger. If you're entering the Whistler's Highway by signing on this sign, you agree to the rules of the highway. 1. Don't travel on the highway in the night, or otherwise, the Whistler will get you. 2. Don't travel alone, otherwise, the Whistler will get you. 3. Don't, absolutely don't, get out of your vehicle while on the highway, otherwise the Whistler will definitely get you. This was emblazoned in red on the sign, with a space at the bottom where numerous signatures, including mine, Gabby's, Becky's, and Brian's, were marked on the surface. Some signatures had been crossed out for no particular reason. The entire sign looked like it was about to fall off, as it carefully balanced on the post holding it up. Boy, this Whistler guy seems like a fun guy to meet, half of me thought to myself, while the other half still felt unsettled by the get you part. Becky also seemed to share my thoughts, as she stared upwards at the sky, which was turning darker. Are you sure we're safe when we go on this highway? I mean, it's almost nighttime, and the sign said... She stammered. Don't worry. The Whistler is just an urban legend, and I doubt he will get mad if we broke one of his precious rules. Brian interrupted. Looking at the 3 people around him, he remarked, Now, come on. Let's get a move on. I don't intend to sleep in the car. He had already opened the car door, and was now waiting for us in the car. The three of us sighed and moved towards our respective cars. The car started and trundled down the Whistler's highway. Looking at the empty desert along the way, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had made a mistake and that we were in grave danger. Still feeling scared, I tilted my head and looked up at the sky. Becky was right. It was almost nighttime. After staring at the desert and the sky for about an hour, I noticed something strange. The dark black sky had turned purple. Now, I didn't know much about weather and sky colors and all that, but I knew the sky shouldn't be purple at what was close to 9 p.m., as my watch indicated. I tried to mention this to Gavi, but she looked distracted, and her foot was continuously pushing down on the gas pedal. It was then I realized something else. The car was slowing down. Looking at the car in front of us, I saw that it was also slowing down. "Fuck!" I heard Gavi shout as she exerted all of her strength into pushing the gas pedal, hoping that the car would go faster. But it was no use. Both of the cars stopped after a few minutes. The engine wasn't dead, and the car was still running, but it wasn't moving. "Well," Gavi said, throwing her arms up in defeat, turning to look at me. "Someone's gotta go out there and fix the damn car." Looking at her eyes, I knew she meant me. I sighed and prepared to open the car door. "Wait!" Becky's shrill voice pierced through the walkie-talkie. "What?" Gavi shouted in response, covering her ears as she expected more loud noises. "Remember the third rule. No getting out of the car while on the highway." "For God's sakes, Becky, you bite into that sign? It looked like someone erected it about 1,000,000 years ago." Brian's angry shout echoed in the car. But the Whistler nothing. It's just a stupid boogeyman story created to scare the kids into saying nothing during the road trips. There's nothing dangerous about stepping outside." Having had enough, I shot back a reply into the walkie-talkie. "You know what, Brian? I will listen to Becky, and I will stay inside the car. You can get your annoying ass eaten by the Whistler, or whatever he's called." Next to me, Gavi opened her mouth seemingly to protest, but she said nothing. "Alright, fine. Don't blame me if nothing happens and we end up wasting our time," Brian snapped. A few minutes of silence passed. "Alright guys, to pass the time, let's play card games." Silence. "Alright, fine. What do you want to play first?" "Let's play I Spy." I spy something with my little eye, beginning with the letter D. Groaning, I replied, "Desert. You're spying a desert." "Correct. Now Jordan, it's your turn." Sign. I looked out of the window, hoping to find something I could spy. That was when I saw it. Far off in the distance, something was standing in the desert. I couldn't quite make out its features, but I knew for a fact it was way taller than an actual human. It had a black top hat on, and it was wearing some kind of red suit. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was looking in our direction. I could vaguely hear some kind of whistling noise coming from that thing. The whistling creature. The Whistler. "What do you think it wants?" Becky's frightened voice came out of the receiver. "I don't know. Maybe it's an illusion." Brian's voice came out, also trembling. I couldn't say anything. I was staring at the thing, transfixed. "Okay, now we should not get out of the car," Becky said. "Okay," me, Gavi, and Brian said in unison. As if that was not obvious, we all sat in our cars, staring at the Whistler. It was whistling a tune. I couldn't quite make out much of the tune, but I knew I heard it before, either on the street or in a movie. But the whistling sounded unnatural. Hearing it sent chills down my spine and made me even more scared. The whistler didn't seem to move. It stood in the same spot, whistling. It was waiting for us to get out of the car. Anxious, I began repeatedly checking the car lock, confirming it was indeed locked before I looked at Gabby. She looked paler than usual, and she said nothing. Well, anything to me at least. As I leaned in close, hoping to comfort her, I heard her muttering something under her breath. I need to get out. I need to get out. I need to get out. I need to get out of the car. Of the car. I was freaked out, and I shook her violently, hoping to snap her out of her chanting. She screamed and freaked out as soon as I shook her, before she looked at me. Did I say anything? She said in a small voice. The four of us seemed to be even more on edge after I told Brian and Becky about Gabby's episode. We were scared to go to sleep, as we knew if we did, we could risk upending like Gabby. Gabby became frightened after I told her what she said, and she clutched my hand. I clutched hers back, equally tight, and all of us sat in silence for a few minutes. Eventually, I heard Gabby's whisper, "I'm hungry." I nodded to acknowledge this, and reached behind to grab the bag of supplies in the back seat. But they weren't in the back seat. I looked around frantically for the bag, until I saw it. For some unknown reason, it was on the road, outside of the car. I rolled down the windows and tried to reach for it, but it was too far away. The only way to get it was to get out of the car. This was its plan. It wanted us to get out of the car so it could do something to us. I rolled up the windows and glared at it. It seemed to notice I would not get out of the car because the whistling seemed to get louder. It was now audible, and my ears rang from it. Despite this, I refused to get out of the car. After a few minutes, the whistling grew quieter again, and we sat in silence again. Gabby's stomach was growling now, but judging from her face, I knew she also didn't want to leave to get the bag. We sat in the car while the walkie-talkie fell silent. It was playing a game with us, and we didn't know when it would end. Eventually, my eyes drooped again. Shit, not now. Must stay awake, I thought, but it was of no use. I drifted off to sleep again. Jordan, it's over. The thing's gone. Brian's excited voice forced my eyelids to open. I looked around. The whistler was gone. We had arrived at the campsite. The bright rays from the sun shone in the car, forcing me to cover my eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief. That thing was finally gone. Come on, Jordan, get your lazy ass out of the car. Brian was standing outside the car and was next to a pitched up tent. You need to help us set up the camp. Next to him, Gabby and Becky were standing with sticks in their hands. Come on, Jordan, they remarked, smiling. All right, I'm coming, I replied. My hand gripped the car door handle as I prepared to open the car door and step outside the car. Suddenly, a sharp pain erupted in the back of my head. As I reeled from the pain, I turned around to see who had hit me. Please, don't scare me like that. Gabby's frightened face whispered next to me. It confused me. Gabby was outside. Unless... I looked outside again. The campsite was gone. We were back in the desert again. The sky still had a strange purple hue to it. And that thing was still there. The whistling grew louder again. The whistler was getting more frustrated now. I was even more scared now. I checked the door if it was locked again. Thank you. I turned to Gabby and whispered, She didn't reply, but she nodded in acknowledgement. We sat in silence as the whistling grew softer again. After a few minutes of silence, the car echoed with Becky's screams. "Get them off of me! Get them off of me! Help me!" I picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "Hello, Brian, Becky? Can you hear me? It's all a dream. Don't panic." No response. The screams continued. This time, I could also hear crying coming from the receiver. It sounded as though Becky was in a lot of pain and desperately needed our help. But we couldn't do anything. We could only hear whatever pain Becky was going through. After a few minutes of screaming, it stopped. To our relief, the car doors on the car in front of us hadn't opened during the entire ordeal, so we heaved a sigh of relief. We knew Becky had overcome the nightmare she had and didn't think of getting out of the car. The whistling grew way louder now as the whistler walked closer to us. It looked taller now, and its arms and legs grew more elongated. It was clearly mad now. I looked around the car and looked at the car in front of us. All of us knew its tricks now. We would not be tricked by it. I paused as I remembered Brian. He hadn't been tricked by it yet, and he was the easiest person to trick since he trusted no one other than himself. Almost on cue, Brian's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Guys, the monster's gone. The coast is clear." Looking at the whistlers who was coming closer, I shouted, "No, it's a trick. Don't believe it." "What are you talking about? What trick?" "The monster. It's still out there." "Jordan, you must be imagining things. I don't see anything." "No, it's still there." "Listen, when I say it's not there, it's not there. To prove it, I will step outside and show you." "No, don't." But it was too late. The car door in the car in front opened, and we watched as Brian's face emerged from the car. It was over in an instant. As soon as Brian's foot stepped on the concrete road, the whistler stopped whistling and launched towards him at a shockingly fast speed. As it reached him, I saw his expression change from one that was joyful and happy to one of pure terror. And then he was gone, along with it. The sky lightened, and the bright rays of the sun shone down upon us once more. We said nothing, even as the cars moved down the highway again. We looked at each other, and we knew one thing. The whistler was real, and it had gotten Brian. A few weeks have passed since Brian's disappearance. As of today, the police are still unable to find his body anywhere, even after interviewing us, since we were the last ones seen with him. All we said was that he disappeared during our camping trip, and we haven't seen him since. We said nothing about the whistler because we knew they didn't think the whistler was real, and we didn't want to seem crazy. Sometimes, I'd like to think we all went crazy during the trip, and that there was no such thing as a whistler, and that we imagined the whole thing. But I don't think that's the case, because when I go down to the whistler's entrance sign to place my flowers to remember Brian, I can still see his signature on the sign, crossed out.